Welcome, everyone, to another Montessori Lives, conversations with notable Montessorians. And this evening, we're honored to have with us Tim Seldin, one of the most respected elders of the Montessori movement. You are president of the Montessori Foundation and chair of the International Montessori Council. Tim has more than 50 years of experience in Montessori education, including 22 years as headmaster of the Barrie School in Maryland, his own alma mater, from age 2, was it, through to high school graduation. Wow. And Tim has led the Institute for Advanced Montessori Studies. He's headed the Newgate School in Sarasota and authored some of the most widely read books in the field, including How to Raise an Amazing Child, The Montessori Way, and Building a World-Class Montessori School, and Montessori for Every Family, among many others. So Tim's voice has really shaped how generations of parents, teachers, and school leaders think about Montessori. So today, I'd like to draw on that long view and ask questions that matter most to the future of Montessori education. So, Tim, let's start with the Barrie School. You attended the Barrie School all the way to high school graduation, and then you returned years later as its headmaster. So, most people, I think, in traditional schools would not want to have anything to do with their school once they graduate. So, what did it mean to you to grow up inside Montessori and then to come back to steward the very school that um, the very community that shaped you?
Well, Mark, first off, I should clarify that I am the past chair. I was the founding chair of the International Montessori Council, and I did indeed lead the organization for more than 20 years. I am now the past chair. And I am also retired from the Newgate School, which was our lab school for many decades. Newgate is down in Sarasota, Florida, doing well. We're focusing on the work of the Montessori Foundation and the Montessori Family Alliance, which is our global network of Montessori parents, hope of creating a movement. My parents founded the Barrie School in 1932. I never really knew a life other than Barrie. I can't tell you that I didn't have trepidation about it. I remember one day my mother talking to me about how when I grew up and was running the Barrie School, I said, no, 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 that's not what I'm going to do. Um, what actually happened was I never really left. I worked there through high school. In the summer camp, I taught riding. I was a camp counselor. Um, in university, I continued that work. I became the director of the camp somewhere around the time of graduation from my first degree. Um, and again, I had no intention. I was going to be a lawyer. I then proceeded to go into psychology. And what happened was there was a situation in Washington, D.C., where there was civil unrest. And I spent 3 days guarding the school with a group of people of color who were graduates of the school or parents of current students. And I heard the stories of how the school had changed either their lives or their families' lives, what it meant to them. And I decided at the end of 3 days that whatever my mother wanted, she could have. And I called her up and I said, put a stake on the Barbie. I'm on my way. You wanted me, I'm yours. And I never really left until I finally concluded in 1993. And I mean, it didn't happen that precipitously. I planned it. But I realized as I got to be older that I had a choice of either continuing to run one school or attempting to pass on whatever wisdom I'd gotten from my parents to other Montessori schools. So, one of the things that I believe I am responsible for is the creation of the idea of Montessori leadership development training and the idea of the profession of leading Montessori schools like Melissa does, that this needed to be its own unique form of governance, of leadership, which is why one of the books is called The Montessori Way. The idea that in business, in marriage, in family life, in all relationships, there's a way of doing this that is both sound business practice and is based on integrity and leads to the creation of sustainable, effective schools.
Mm. So, Tim, after more than 50 years in this work, what do you understand about Montessori now that you wish you'd grasped when you first walked into a classroom as a young teacher?
Oh, I don't know that I have feelings that are terribly different. I mean, when I first learned about Montessori, it would have been 1962. I was in my next to last year at Barrie's High School. It was a spring day. We were all sitting on the lawn in front of the school. And in those days, there was no air conditioning. And my mother was normally a very quiet, dignified woman. And she was raising her voice, and the window was open, and we could all hear her. We couldn't quite understand what she was saying, but we knew she was agitated. And she
Mm.
came out the big front door of the mansion that was the main building and escorted this little lady dressed in a black raincoat with a great big satchel out the front steps and down to the street and told her not to come back again. And that night at the dinner table with lots and lots of guests that we had from actually from Harvard. It was a group of psychologists who were staying with us. I heard about the Montessori Nazis, and I'd never heard the word Montessori. And I mean, I think I'd heard it somewhere. My mother's brochures for the school said the Barrie School is based on the integrated work of Jean Piaget, John Dewey, Maria Montessori, and Anna Freud and Alfred Adler. And so I'd heard the name Montessori, but mom didn't call it a Montessori school. And I heard a lot about Montessori for the next several hours. And then over the next year or so, I kept hearing it. And I learned that my mother had taken a course in Montessori in New York City back in the 20s, I believe. And this was Margaret Stevenson, Mark. Um,
Mm.
she was there. She had broken up with the American Montessori Society. Um, she was in Washington to raise money to start the Washington Montessori Institute. And she was going around the remaining Montessori schools in the Washington, D.C. area looking for people who were able to help her in her work. And she said to my mother, I can make you legal. And my mother said, I don't need you to make me legitimate. I've been running this school for many years. I don't need you. Anyway, the bottom line is Montessorians love kids. They don't like each other very much.
Mm.
So from my experience, I believe Montessori is, among other things, a worldview. It's a philosophy of life. It's obviously a way of running a school. But I think what's important about it is that there's much more to it that really connects to the work of one of um, my friends is Dr. Rianne Eisler of the Center for Partnership Systems, as you know. And the way I see it, Montessori is about mental health. It's about human empowerment. It's about social change. And it's about basically trying to save the world. The idea of helping people to learn how to live a life that finds common grounds among people who are very different, that attempts to do no harm, that attempts to preserve the environment, things like that. So I mean, to me, it's a very important and fundamental philosophy of life.
Mm. So much of your writing returns to the idea of preparation of the adult. So, what does the inner work of a Montessori teacher actually look like in practice beyond the certification and the materials?
Well, Maria Montessori said to a group of reporters at one point when they said, how can people who themselves did not grow up in a Montessori school and clearly are not, quote, normalized, how can they do the work of being a Montessori educator. And we often forget, we keep saying Maria Montessori was a professor of medicine. We forget she was a professor of psychiatry.
Mm.
So, although psychiatry in those days was closer to what we would now call neuropsychology, neurobiology, or neurology, um, brain science more than the talking cure that Freud and his followers developed. She certainly was well aware of the issue of mental illness and human suffering, and she herself, as you know, struggled with emotions and with issues of her role in society as a woman, her role in society as someone who was middle class, being unmarried, being an unmarried mother, which we won't get into too much. The long and short of it is, to me, what she said to those reporters is, you fake it. You learn to play a role, and you learn to do no harm and to not get in the children's way. I mean, I think we talk a lot about preparing the adult to do this work. And the reality is, adults are imperfect beings. I think we certainly want to try to help the adult who's working in Montessori to ask themselves, why do I do this work? I am not a victim. I did not take a vow of poverty. I am choosing to do this because it gives my life some meaning that I appreciate. And so for me, we certainly need to help the adult understand the difference between their individual issues, their desire to be loved or to be in control or to be a incredible interior designer, which I think a lot of Montessorians really are, as opposed to being an aid to life, of allowing children to reveal themselves and unfold. So to me, the real issue of adult preparation is first off, learning that there's so much more to this than knowing how to work with pieces of wood, metal, and plastic,
Mm.
how to present. It's how to be a link between the child and the environment, the materials, to ask questions rather than give answers, the idea of how to bear witness to children as their minds are developing, their lives are unfolding. I mean, your friend Gavin, my friend Gavin too, would say that, the secret is to be in relationship with these children, because when they really feel that you care, when you connect with them, then they begin to reveal themselves and you really get somewhere. So to me, that's the real preparation of the adult, is to understand that what we are doing is closer to mental health, although we're not sitting there listening to their tales of woes and they're asking them to tell us about their dreams. We are basically doing prophylactic or preventative mental health work to try to raise happier children.
Mm. So where does the ego show up most quietly in Montessori classrooms in your experience? And how have you
Everywhere.
learned have you learned to
Mine's been,
recognize it in yourself over the decades?
well, whenever you start feeling like my training's better than your training, because, I went to AMI and you only went to MWEI or whatever. Um, it's part of human nature. I mean, you get any group of people together and they start comparing each other. There's the whole issue of body image and social standing and why do I feel like a wallflower and people don't love me, or whatever the issues are. I mean, I think what we try to do is help people to feel seen and heard. And I
Mm.
think that a big part of what we can do as school leaders and teacher educators is to try to help these people to approach all this with a certain sense of lighthearted humor,
Mm.
um, a sense of I'm not going to say humility. I think humility is probably not the right word. I mean, if you're really bright, you're really asking questions, you're probably not necessarily humble. But I think the idea is to recognize that, like Montessori children, they can enjoy their work, allow other people to be doing great work and enjoy, their success, instead of feeling like their success diminishes them in terms of their value. Again, I think more than anything else, what we can do is to try to help people to find common ground. The idea that we can be with other people, we can listen to them, we don't need to be thinking about what we're going to respond to them in a conversation instead of listening to them. In other words, it's not a contest. It's just, let's just live our lives and let's just keep trying to turn our enemy into our friend. Let's keep trying to find a point of commonality, a connection, and let's try to enjoy our lives. To me, that's a big part of this. But again, I see Montessori as fundamentally what you might call peace education, which
Yeah.
is not singing Kumbaya. It's learning how to de-escalate. It's learning how to see the other as a real person instead of as the enemy. And it's learning how to live and learn from each other.
Yeah. Now you've seen a lot of classrooms around the world. When you walk into a Montessori classroom anywhere in the world, what is it that tells you immediately whether the adults have done that inner work?
Uh, I'm not sure after all these years that I can tell when the adults have done their work. What I can tell you is I can see when they haven't done their work,
Mm,
which is generally, when children are sitting at their desks and they have work plans and they're clearly not enjoying their work plans.
mm,
Um, you know the story of the little boy who was being interviewed by a gentleman from the London Times who said, I don't know that we can do whatever we want in Montessori, but I can tell you that we like what we do. Um,
mm,
if I see a classroom that has the tone and the feel of most conventional classrooms, then I worry. But I don't see that very often. I mean, truthfully, from my experience, Mark, the worst Montessori schools I've ever seen, the ones that are in the South African townships, the public Montessori that you and I have seen around the world, they're all kinds. But the worst one is usually one of the most interesting schools in town.
mm. So what do you mean by that?
Well, even a little Montessori tends to produce more partnership, more community, more engagement, more ability to do things that kids find interesting. In general, it tends to be a happier school
Mm,
than many schools are. So again, while there are degrees of knowledge in Montessori, I mean, as David Kahn once told us, you get a doctorate in Montessori. I mean, you can just keep going up and up and up, and you can keep reading and studying. Spend your whole life just studying Maria Montessori's original work, no less all the people around her who kept taking the work further, like yourself,
mm,
uh, and keep going. But the reality is, while there are so many different layers of Montessori, in general, most Montessori schools are going to be pretty interesting places. Again, there's some that are much more chaotic, much littler and louder, um, but they're more likely to be interesting places from my
yeah.
experience.
Mm. Well, let's talk about leadership. So, 22 years leading your own alma mater, the Barrie School, plus heading other schools and writing the book on how to build them. What would you say is the single most underestimated factor in building a world-class Montessori school?
Oh, I'd say the biggest danger for many people that lead Montessori schools is either they are not truly people of the faith, they're people who got a job because they know how to run a school and they try to bring their knowledge of how to run a government school or another traditional school into Montessori. And hopefully they don't do any harm, but you really, what is your job as a Montessori leader? I mean, I would argue there's three great roles. The first is you have to be the pastor, the sermon, the rabbi, whatever
Mm,
spiritual term you want to use. You are a teacher. If you can't sell it, if you can't articulate, if you don't know more Montessori than your staff, at least enough to be able to get out in front of the public and the parents and to be able to speak with authority and deep conviction about what it is we're all about,
mm,
even if you're not a Montessori teacher. there's a problem. I mean, if you basically think Montessori is lovely, but there are other better systems than that, then there's a problem. It would be like hiring a rabbi to teach a Baptist school or to run a Baptist school. It doesn't work real well.
Mm,
Second is, your job as a school leader is many, many things, but one of them is to recruit and retain fantastic teachers. I mean, you got to go out there and find them and develop them and recognize it and nurture them. And that skill is like taming deer. Um,
mm,
so because there's so few great teachers in the world, and you don't want to be stealing from other schools, you need to go out and be looking for these wonderful people and draw them to you. And the same thing with parents. I mean, you got to go out and build a community of families who are not going to break your heart, who are not there just because either the state is subsidizing it or my sister sends her kids to the school, or I heard it was a great way to get early education for uni. I don't know, whatever people think. Um, so I think that one of the issues is we need people who really understand what it takes to run one of these schools and sees the connection. The second is we often get people who are teachers who over-identify with the teachers.
mm,
And while I'm a great believer in taking good care of the teachers, it's not that simple. It's an ecosystem. It's a balance between the needs of the business office to pay the bills, um, needs of the facilities to be in good shape and really reflect the values that the school professes, the needs of the teachers, to feel that they're seen, heard, and adequately cared for, that they have a voice.
mm,
And the same thing with the parents, I mean, and the students. So it requires a very careful understanding that you're working with many different constituencies,
mm,
and you have to have courage. In fact, one of the things that Paul Epstein and I are beginning to develop is another book with a title similar to another author's book called The Courage to Lead. Because I find in our work, quite often, we get into situations where people are either unwilling to change. They would say something like, I've been a teacher for 60 years. This is the way it's always worked for me. I'm not going to do what you want. I mean, my argument is your classroom is not an island unto itself. It is part of a unified whole. And somehow or another, I'm not going to ask you to change, but I am going to ask you to understand that you can't simply go off rogue. You are part of a system. And so ideally, I chose you because you already were this kind of person that fits in with our school's
mm,
unique ethos. But I think Montessori leadership is about understanding the need to balance money and the concerns of teachers and the concerns of children and the parents and all these different stages, and understand that whether it's infancy or high school or anything in between, it's all valuable. There is no part of your school that is not equally important.
yeah. Now, boards and school leaders often weaken Montessori culture without meaning to. Where does that erosion most commonly begin, and how can we guard against it?
Well, again, just as a school leader needs to be first and foremost a true believer in Montessori, a board of governors in a Montessori school needs to be made up of men and women who are truly committed to Montessori and not to their own children or their friends' children or the school as if it was a business. And, if we're going to stop making cars, maybe we better make television sets. I mean, the idea is you are
Yeah.
guardians of a heritage, a legacy, a trust, and your responsibility is to keep the original vision intact. I mean, obviously things continue to evolve and change, but the idea is that first and foremost, we are faithful to what we're all about, which means you better darn well know a lot about it. And the
Mm,
average person on a board doesn't. They don't know how to be a board member. They're
mm,
playing with funny money. It isn't their money. Um, they don't know what they're doing. And so most of the trouble that I see in these schools comes from the boards.
yeah. Do you have any advice for a new head of school who would be stepping into Montessori today?
Um, get an MBA, Master's of Business Administration. Um, Most of the degrees in running them, the MEDs that we see in the US,
Mm,
very little of that, in my opinion, is useful. I would say attend one of the great Montessori leadership training courses. Again, some of them are better than others, but I mean, you want one that is really, really rigorous and is based on organizational theory as well as Montessori best practice and so forth. I mean, and be ready to keep learning because this is exhausting work.
yeah, sure is. Well, let's talk about the family now. Your book, How to Raise an Amazing Child, has reached parents who never set foot inside a Montessori classroom. What would you say is the most common mistake that well-meaning parents, Montessori or otherwise, are still making at home?
Thinking that if they just buy one more lesson or that the child is going to do stuff because they put so much time into preparing some lesson for the week or the day. I don't know. The other thing is, of course, they miss, by homeschooling or by thinking they're going to do it at home, they avoid paying tuition, which is true. On the other hand, there's a trade-off. One is you're basically there at the beck and call of your child, or child's at your beck and call. But the other is that, the more children in a Montessori class, the more Montessori we're going to get. It is not about you as the adult and the child, it's about the children and each other
Mm,
with you kind of kibitzing on the side. The typical family only has one, two, three kids, and you're going to get a very, very different experience over the years with situation like that. So, it's certainly whatever people choose to do is fine. But I think that's the biggest trade-off I see is that, they do it for a while, they have a good time, they think they're doing Montessori, and I don't know uh, how far off they are from what real Montessori looks like. On the other hand, they're not happy. If they're not unhappy, I'm not unhappy. So
mm,
I wish them well.
yeah. Now, you're a father yourself, you're a stepfather, grandfather of Montessori children. What
Mhm.
has parenting taught you about Montessori that no training course ever could?
Well, I don't know. Again, I grew up in a home that didn't call itself Montessori, but was, definitely pretty over the top. I got home every night. I had to prepare dinner for myself and my parents. I had a horse at the age of 4. Um, we didn't believe in servants, so every Saturday we had to clean this great big house ourselves. I don't know. Free range parenting, teaching kids to work, um, listening to them a lot, um, reassuring them that this too will pass, whatever their anxiety is. You know, Basically just saying, look, you're not, you are the hero of your own story, and your story is one of billions of stories, and it's all good.
Mm,
Let's just breathe in and breathe out.
mm,
A lot of time out of doors. Great believer in boats and horses and woods and gardening and things like that.
mm. I have a couple of questions about philosophy now for you. So we talk about the prepared environment as if it sort of does the work by itself. Would you agree that the adult is the most powerful part of that environment? And how would you reframe the prepared environment for someone new to Montessori?
Well, the prepared environment is like setting up a library or a workshop where everything has a place and you know where everything is. It simply allows people, children, whatever, to operate without needing to be constantly told what to do. It's autodidactic. It allows for a great deal of personal choice and agency, and it's designed to be comfortable. It should feel like home. So the prepared environment is important on an aesthetic level. It's important in terms of the ability to choose. It's also important in that it creates order, and of course, the materials within it are have a built-in control of error. So again, the child doesn't need to say constantly, "Did I do it right? Did I do it right? Did I do it right?" Now, I take that with a grain of salt. Having grown up in Montessori, I can tell you there's plenty of kids, including me, many times in my life, where you're basically looking busy and you're just fooling around, um, maybe daydreaming, maybe talking with your buddies, but basically moving pieces of wood, metal, and plastic around on a rug.
Yeah.
In terms of the importance of the elements, it's like an ecosystem. You've got lots of different things in an environment. Um, and the adult is important, the children are important, the materials are important. I mean, the schedule of the day is important, the idea of agency and choice are important. Certainly, the adult is disproportionately critical because you're the gardener, you're the one
Mm,
organizing it all. On the other hand, if you're a Montessori educator and you're saying to yourself or your colleagues or your principal, no meetings before school because I need to go into that classroom and spend 30 minutes preparing it, I would say, well, wait a minute, whose classroom is it? It's the children's house. It's
mm,
their work. Why are you doing that? Or why are you doing it when they're not there?
mm,
You're touching their environment. It'd be like me going into my grown child's house and rearranging the house. Um, I'd say that, Mark, I don't remember if you went to a Montessori school or not, but I know you've been around this long enough. The kids are probably much greater influence on each other than we as guides are.
mm,
So again, I think the children are the most valuable Montessori material in the classroom.
mm.
So if you've got a good group of kids, they're seducing
Yeah.
children into more and more and more discoveries and ideas. And yeah, you're giving your lessons too. And yeah, you're the control of error and saying, "Excuse me, you need to walk through the room more carefully with that," or
Right.
whatever.
Do you ever see Montessorians confusing tradition with principle and clinging to the wrong one?
No, what I see is just misunderstanding. I mean, lots of Montessorians who think they understand Montessori, but they really don't. Um, Good examples of that would be things like the variations and extensions, or how many cards and counter variations do you need? We have, teddy bears, we have little Valentine hearts, we have pumpkins,
Yeah.
whatever, kangaroos. I mean, come on, how many of these things do you need? It's just one material. I've seen classrooms where there are literally 8 different variations on the shelf.
Mm,
Then there's the issue of the child can't touch something that you haven't given them a lesson on, or the child's doing it wrong. I mean, that's why we have a control of error for the child
mm,
to discover that they didn't do it right.
mm,
Um, so I think, again, there are all kinds of things, the over overemphasis on card materials, thinking that, card materials are the same thing as real things. I
mm,
mean, I think there are lots of people who get caught up in lots of different issues, failing to understand what we're really trying to do is to uh, encourage the children to, one, discover just how well they can learn things, and that hard work, really hard work, is not something to be avoided.
mm. What's your thinking about inviting children to lessons? Should it be based on the teacher's idea of readiness, or should you think children on the other side, on the other end of the spectrum, all children should be invited to all lessons?
Well, I think, if you're as a guide, you're probably going to give somewhere between 20 and 50 lessons a day. I can't imagine inviting an entire class of 25 to 35 children to every single lesson. I think that inviting rather than retiring or requiring is desirable. I certainly think that any child who wants to attend a lesson should be able to do so. And I think that certainly periodically you want to draw the kids' attention and say, you know, I'm going to give a lesson on my friends, the Mullis family. And if you would like to attend and meet my friends, the Mullis, and learn about their lives,
Mm.
I have room for 8 of you over here. And
Mm.
any of the rest of you who wish to sit in, you're welcome to observe, but you need to be quiet observers.
Mm.
There's no wrong answer to this. I think the bottom line is you're inviting, you're not requiring.
Yeah, good. Well, let's get into politics, a bit more controversial subject here in Montessori land. Now, in Australia, Montessori serves only about 12 hundredths of 1% of children in this country. And my back of the napkin calculation when I lived there many years ago was about 3% of schools in the United States are Montessori's, probably more than that now. But, after more than a century of proven results, even 5%, even let's even say 9% is still not impressive. It's still not world changing. It doesn't stop the world from heading down the path that it is now. So why do you think Montessori has not gone mainstream after a century of positive, proven results in on every continent?
There's an old saying, those who can do, those who can't teach, the most incompetent become professors of education. In most countries, education is political. Um, it is funded by governments. There are various politicians or bureaucrats of one sort or another that are involved in the idea of what should be taught, what should be in the curriculum, how will we measure results. And there's relatively little connection to meaningful research. And let's face it, even the research we've got, we need a lot more research to be able to prove that what we're saying is true really is true.
Mm.
Um, the bottom line is that I think that Montessori is steadily gaining ground in more and more countries. I'm amazed at how many different cultures are interested in it. And I think it's mostly not because of Montessori as a movement, it's because of all the brain research. So people are forming the connections. They're seeing that Montessori is probably the most compatible. Not all people who are aware of brain research are interested in Montessori because they may see that as, I don't know, a franchise or something that makes it unpalatable. A lot of countries are getting interested in it.
Mhm.
And even those countries that are not are basically going down similar paths. And as Jean Piaget was, as you know, a Montessori educator, and he used to say that I don't worry about, whether it's called Montessori, whether it's not, they're going to rediscover it. Let's just focus on how children learn to think. What can we do? And I see lots of movements towards something that is more partnership oriented. At the same time, I see forces that are different. So I think it's imperfect. As far as the world, we have two different forces. We have we have weaponry that increasingly makes it easy to kill from a distance and kill without having to get bloody yourself. Um, and we have individuals like some of our politicians in my country and other countries who are rather, how can I put it, pig-headed, um, who are doing things that I really think are not best for world peace. On the other
Mm.
hand, we have more and more people who are committed to the idea of human dignity and of people being heard and being seen. So it's an imperfect give and take of different forces. Um, I think that the long and short of it is you know what a trim tab is on a airplane or a boat, right? And for those people listening who don't, let me just explain. People ask, how can you change the world? Margaret Mead always said, never doubt the ability of a small group of individuals to change the world because the only thing that ever worked. Well, on a great big ocean going cargo ship, the, um, the rudder is huge, much bigger than a house. And it's quite thick and it's quite heavy. And we don't even have hydraulics that could turn it. I mean, it just, the forces, once that boat is underway, are enormous. But if you look carefully at the end of these great big, 20, 30-foot deep rudders, you'll see there's a little rudder like you'd see on a personal sailboat. That's called a trim tab. That trim tab is what the helms person actually is steering with the joystick. And when that little rudder turns, it forces the big rudder to turn, which slowly forces the ship to turn. And they're not like a sports car. They don't just suddenly veer. They slowly turn. We are the trim tab. We are
Mm,
imperfect. We're not always consistent, but our little amount of energy is slowly changing the world.
mm,
Now, will we change the world in time? I don't know. Um, I would rather go down fighting than not. I'm sorry for that metaphor. I would like to go down loving um, rather than just giving up and saying it's never going to change. I believe that we are going to change the world, and we are one slow step at a time. The other thing that I would say is we've got to stop thinking that Montessorians have a monopoly on the truth. We are just one force among many, and we have many allies out there in the world of child honoring parenting and child honoring education and people who want to make a positive difference in the world. So I think what we have to do is look for allies like the Steiner schools and the free
mm,
schools and all the other kinds of schools that are kind to children
mm.
and recognize they may be different from us, but we have a lot more in common than we have
Yeah.
divides us. So we just find common ground.
Speaking of Montessorians who think they have a monopoly on the truth, we are notoriously tribal and always have been. What do you think it is about Montessori that brings out that trait, and what is that costing the movement?
Well, as we know, Maria Montessori herself, was torn between that desire to give it away and anger at people who misinterpreted it. Um, so, the tribalism really goes right back to Dr. Montessori herself. But I
Mm,
think that the bottom line is that there, again, are degrees of understanding and there are degrees of fidelity within Montessori. Um, there's no question that, like all science, it's open to continual experimentation and revalidation and so forth. And no two people have a same level of understanding. So I think what I've always said is that the more you understand about what Maria Montessori really wrote, said, and did, and the more you understand about Montessori best practice, and the closer you are to best practice, understanding there's some things that are not even connected, like whether the Tower of Cubes is presented horizontally or vertically or built upside down, with the smallest cube on the bottom, or whether it's painted chartreuse or purple versus pink. I mean, come on, these are not the important issues.
mm,
However, there are really important issues. And the more you understand the things that make Montessori work, the more likely you are to get the results that made Maria Montessori world famous.
mm,
Increasingly, we don't see the things that are described in the early Montessori essays. And people wonder whether it's because of cell phones or today's child, whatever, microplastics in their cells. And I would argue children are children are children. The issue, yes, the technology is different. Yes, but I mean, Montessori has come through so many different eras. And in the authentic Montessori schools, we tend to still see the same results that Maria Montessori did.
mm,
So the closer you get to the original, and by that I don't mean some kind of orthodoxy, but the core principles, the more likely you are to see the things that we think of as Montessori. And
Mm.
because of that, anyone can learn it. It's just you can't make people do it. So we tend to get tribal, and we say, well, my movement, let's be honest, AMI, tends to be much more careful about are we passing down the legacy without confusing it with anything else. And I think that's unfortunate because Montessori educators are capable of amazing things. We can learn about Jean Piaget and his connection to Montessori and how constructivism and Montessori are really the same. We can learn about Anna Freud and Sigmund Freud and Erik Erikson, Alfred Adler, all of whom, not as Sigmund, but all the others were Montessori educators. We can understand Montessori as essentially applied psychology or psychotherapy. Um, there's so many things we can learn. Um, but again, I think we tend to get caught up either in the curriculum. For example, I love ETC and I love Waseka and Mandela and all these other people that keep coming up with great curriculum, a lot of which, by the way, is not new. It's actually the Claremont's curriculum that was discovered. But people do keep coming up with new things. You yourself have developed some new Montessori lessons and materials. And I think that's not what makes Montessori important. You can teach anything using Montessori. I mean, people in Asia are now, have developed a whole system for teaching, you know, Chinese literacy, using Cantonese or Mandarin. I mean, that wasn't something Maria Montessori herself did, but the principles behind it are the same. So again, I think the bottom line is if you appreciate the authenticity and you try to not get caught up in my tribe's better than your tribe and recognize we can all learn from each other, at the very least, we don't cancel each other out.
Mm. So you said when Montessori is done authentically, it has the same results that Maria saw. Who should have the ultimate authority over what is a Montessori authentic curriculum? Is it the SPG, the Scientific Pedagogical Group of AMI? Is it AMS, the Montessori Foundation, or somebody else? And why does that question matter so much?
There are no Montessori police. There are only voluntary associations that simply say, if you are one of us, this is what we're looking for you to do, and you can voluntarily seek our seal of approval. Um, Look, I think that, like all things, Nancy Rambush always said that each generation reinterprets the work of Maria Montessori just as they reinterpret the work of every great thinker
Mhm.
through their own experience and their own perspective. Um, I think it's an evolving thing. I think my point is that those schools that do succeed the most tend to be those schools that have most carefully tried to understand what made Montessori work, as opposed to my trainer said. Your trainer may or may not know what she was talking about, and you may or may not have heard her correctly. Let's face it, most
Mm.
training courses are quick and they're hurried, and depending on what you remember, how much your brain could absorb after 6 weeks of training or whatever, there are levels of training. So the ideal, in my opinion, would be a 3-year course of study in Montessori from age infancy through at least elementary, if not beyond, and lots of daily work with children in classrooms and observation and understanding of group psychology and all kinds of issues
Mm.
having to do with working with children. In reality, for $5 a week and a tuna fish sandwich, people aren't going to put in 3 years of work. Um,
Yeah.
so in other words, because we need teachers quickly, we can't afford to have rigorous training programs normally. AMI comes the closest. There are AMS courses that are very different. I remember
Mm.
Michael Dorr when he was at St. Catherine's talking to a principal who was trying to decide where to send her teacher and said, well, I can get the same AMS diploma for less money by sending someone to this training course, which is also AMS affiliated, and it'll cost me less money and be much quicker, or I can send them to you. And why? What's the difference? And he said, well, it's not the diploma, it's the level of care and depth of the training.
Mm.
Anyway, the
You,
bottom line is we keep growing.
yeah. And you said Montessori is an evolving thing. So do you think that there are areas where Montessori needs to be updated to better fit the modern world without losing its essence?
Uh, Well, obviously, curriculum needs to be updated. I mean, just in biology, for example, we know things we didn't know at that time in terms of the way life is structured. So we have to keep watching just to make sure that we're not teaching facts that are not factual. Um, but to me, again, the method is not the materials. The materials are simply a tool to help children discover or understand or develop skills in certain areas. If anything, I'd like to see us go back. I'd like to see children's houses and elementary classrooms where um, there's much more cooking and carpentry and
Mm,
gardening and animal care and high adventure and trekking around the outback and all
mm,
these things that to me develop, the real Montessori spirit. And the
yeah,
same thing with art and music and theater and so forth. But again, an adult who's teaching the kids how to do a musical production is not the same as an adult who helps the kids to figure out what do you want to do and how can I be of service to you to achieve what you want to do. In other words, we're trying to help the kids learn how to do it for themselves rather than simply be extensions of our ego.
yeah. So speaking of that, AI is moving rapidly into homes and classrooms with humanoid robots not far behind. Be pretty soon when we see, the Neo or the the Tesla robot out walking the dog or doing the shopping and so on. And then a short skip and a hop to having robots in front of children in classrooms, I think. How do you see the role of the Montessori adult holding up against that tide when people can say, well, the AI powered robot can individualize instruction for my child?
Well, okay. Again, I think that I don't care whether it's a human or if it's a robot or if it's a TV set. Telling someone about something isn't the same thing as they're experiencing it.
Mhm.
So the issue of Montessori is discovery from interacting with the real world. And instruction is only a small part of what's needed. I mean, what you want to do is make kids aware that something exists, show them how to get it from the shelf to wherever they're going to work, helping them get some awareness of the possibility inherent within that. And hopefully the material is seductive enough they actually they're drawn to it, they want to do it. So I don't care if that's a robot doing it or a human being or a dog. The issue is what's the role of the guide of the instructor.
Mm,
I have a hard time believing that too many children are going to be as drawn to a robot as to a real human being. I could be
mm,
wrong. There are people falling in love with their AIs because the artificial intelligence persona is telling them everything they want to know. On the other hand, they don't cuddle up well at night. And so, again, I think we're seeing enormous disruptions beginning to evolve as companies lay off people. On the other hand, I think we're beginning to see um, economies of scale. In other words, companies are able to produce things in greater quantity. I
mm,
think, if anything, we're going to start finding, eventually it's going to balance out. I'm not sure how it's going to be. There are various scientific or science fiction writers who talk about what the future might be For example, will you and I need to work, or will there be an automatic base level of income just because we breathe? I don't know what's coming. What I do know is it's here, and it's one more thing we got to play with.
Mm,
Um, I don't know if you and I have ever talked about Abigail, my trained AI. Um, so
mm,
Abigail is what I call my AI that I use to assist me in my work. And I fed in every single piece of work from Maria Montessori, uh, Paula Preslak, her mom, Paula Polk Lillard, E.M. Standing, Rita Kramer, all of my work. And for 3 years, I've been training her in my theories of school leadership and all kinds of stuff. And she's pretty darn good now. I mean, when I ask her to do something, it's pretty much spooky, like seeing a young graduate student assist me.
mm,
I still have to watch her, but it's pretty good. In fact, we now have the Montessori Family Alliance is releasing something we call the Montessori Navigator, which is a website for parents where not only do they have the magazine Tomorrow's Child and all the archives of 30 some years, we've got, design your home, how's the curriculum work? How do I get my kid to go to bed? You name it, whatever.
mm,
All kinds of advice that the parent can use, having put in the information about her children. It helps her to keep a diary of child development and milestones. It's a pretty good tool. Um,
mm,
we'll see.
mm. So, children under, because of the absorbent mind, of course, children under 6 are very impressionable. And I think it would be a real shame for us to entrust that education of that age in particular to robots rather than to humans, even imperfect humans, because of that. We don't know what impressions the robots will leave at that age. However, it must be very tempting for governments to cut costs, to replace whining, complaining, striking teachers with AI robots. What do you think it will take for governments to take Montessori education seriously in the public education system?
Well, you've asked two questions there. The first is, the implied question is, do I really think AI is going to hit the average classroom? And I don't really. I mean, I think it'll play a role, just as computers play a role in a lot of classrooms. But to me, it's just a freaking tool. Um, it's not. It doesn't replace humans. Doesn't replace the process of learning. It's just a tool. And I also think that we're going to discover that the energy these are not cheap. Just the sheer cost in energy to run these things is becoming a problem already. So I have serious doubt that this is going to become something so widely used as we currently are seeing it. I think we're in a brief honeymoon period where it's
Mm,
not so outrageously expensive that anyone could do it. Um, I do think that people are already discovering with tablets and Chromebooks and so forth that they don't do a great job of educating children. I
mm,
mean, again, it's all about relationships. And
mm,
I think what people are realizing is that for schools to really work, we need to focus on social emotional learning and human relationship. Uh, your second question, what will it take for people to take Montessori seriously in the government schools? And I don't know. I think that again, as the science of brain development continues to amount, as people begin to understand more and more what works and what doesn't work, there'll be a whole question about what is school for, and what is the government willing to pay for, and what's the role of a teacher, and what's the best way to organize the whole thing. If I had to guess, I would guess we're going to see the disbandment of the public school system as we now know it. I think we're going to see more and more countries where people create either micro schools or home schools or co-ops or private schools of one sort or another with government funding to support it, and some kind of way for the government to satisfy themselves that kids are actually being educated. But I think you're going to start seeing a more decentralized schooling, if is my guess.
Mm, yeah, that would be good news. Do you think 50 years on, Tim, do you think Montessori can save the world? Midway into Trump's second term, what signs of hope do you see? Um, and where do you think we might be quietly losing ground?
Well, I think we're losing ground in that in many countries we're getting an oligarchy of a huge wealth that is so wealthy compared to the next tier down. It's ridiculous. So it's like a new aristocracy. Um, I don't know what all that means, and I don't know how to work out. As far as Montessori, I think the fundamental issues are simple. We are either going to make the planet uninhabitable, which is possible, or we're going to destroy each other with our weaponry. The only question is, will we get ourselves under control before that happens? And I believe the best shot we've got at creating conditions where we may not blow the planet up and we may get um, climate change reversed is through children who are educated through something like Montessori, whether it's called Montessori or not. So
Mm,
50 years out, I'm putting my money on the Montessorians. I don't know if it's going to be called Montessori, but I think for all intents and purposes, the movement goes on.
yeah. Before we close, I wanted to open it up to any of you who are listening. Do you have questions or comments you'd like to ask Tim?
I'll just make a comment, Tim. Thank you. It's been lovely listening to you this evening. I came across a recent article that you wrote on LinkedIn, what Montessori parents have in common and what it means for our schools. I think it was in response to another article that
Hmm.
Isabella Kai had written.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it's when I read it, and I'm very old school because I've printed it off and highlighted it rather than just keep reading it on screen. But it was an article that resonated with me more than anything I've read in a really long time. And I think I've shared it with my marketing manager, I've shared it with my board, I've shared it with a number of people because I think you've just got it so spot on, especially when you talk about um, schools and how Montessori schools, like I've got this sentence highlighted, um, where schools struggle, they explain Montessori, they do not translate it, and that's two very different things. And it's really made me rethink how have we been approaching parent education and how have we been approaching connecting our community and how have we been approaching recruiting our staff. And it really just brought it all back to what you were talking about tonight is these kind of core principles and how this is all kind of everything is connected and cultivated through. Um, but it's just if people haven't read it, I would really recommend
Mhm.
finding it and reading it, and like I said, sharing it with your board, especially because I think it really helped. It helped a lot of my board directors really understand what a Montessori school needs to be, especially around enrollments and enrolling families that are, like you say, you're not trying to sell them on this, but you're really trying to say you found what you were looking for. And I know that when I do my enrollment process, I'm very clear about not trying to persuade them, but very clear in if you want this, and this, we don't have that. And we're actually never going to have those things. But if you want this, and this, we've got that. And you found it. And I think doing that from the very beginning, but I thought that article was it really brought me back to the center of a lot of things. So thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate that. I have a saying that's very irreverent and politically incorrect called "You've been dating all the wrong guys." Um, so many Montessori schools just believe that, once we marry this person, they'll fall in love with us and they'll understand. We'll educate them, and it generally doesn't work, which is why we keep losing people. Now, in Australia, you may not be losing as many because you've got government help for what we call the elementary grades in the United States. But the reality is we have lots of parents who don't know what the heck they're in. They don't know, they don't care. They just know that, their kids happy or they're not unhappy, and it's good enough for them. And I think ideally it's like a marriage. You can't change people, but you can try to help people figure out, are you the perfect match for them? And are they the perfect match for you? Because it's got to be a three-way relationship. I mean, the kids got to be happy, parents got to be happy, and your teachers and you have got to be happy. And and finding the right people is really big. By the way, one of the things that I've been doing a lot over my career is helping people to recruit and retain the right families. Written a whole bunch of books about that. We have a program at the foundation, effectively, that is school marketing. If you're ever interested in that, just go to our website, montessori.org. And then we have this, the Family Alliance is one of our big projects. The idea of there's because in some way or another they don't want to hurt your feelings or they don't want you angry with them. The average parent is a little weird in terms of how they hear things that we say, whether it's in writing or videos or whatever, unless it's really irreverent. Some of you may have seen Tiny Cabin Montessori. Have you met my friend Brianna?
Yes.
So, I think things that are really irreverent tend to work. But the bottom line is the family alliances has tended to be a second voice that parents can trust, and they know they're gonna get a funny answer, but a truthful answer, and we're not going to try to change them. We're going to ask them questions.
Mm.
And I think that there are all kinds of things schools can do to try to find. Can you see the cat appearing and disappearing? Um, I live with 20 dogs and two cats and four horses, and in and out. Um, so basically, I think that there are things we can do to increase the odds.
Mm. Very sweet message from Sarah Jane. Thank you. What a total pleasure to be able to connect with a global Montessori guru. I've so enjoyed this evening session and feel so blessed that Tim has given his time to us all. Sarah Jane, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that's not his office. That's an AI.
Actually, it is my office. It's just I'm sitting in the kitchen right now. Um, and so it is it is a phony picture of the real office, which is not as neat as this at the moment.
Oh. Um,
I just felt he was practicing a very ordered Montessori classroom with his office, because most of our offices don't look like that.
No, I assure you mine doesn't.
So, Tim, if you could leave one message for the next generation of Montessorians, those who will carry on this work into the next century, what would you want them to hear?
Oh, um, you're blessed. I mean, I think few people are lucky enough to actually get paid to do something they enjoy doing. And I think
Mm.
a lot of us in Montessori, there may be moments when we have self-doubt, but I think we do enjoy what we do a lot. And certainly for me, that's the way I've felt over the years. I actually like what I do, and I don't regret it. And many of us get into this because of our kids. In my case, no, that's not how it happened. I got in it because of my mother, who was a character, I might add. One-arm push-ups when she was 50, and horseback riding, mountain climbing, quite the character. Long and short of it is my message is carry on. It's good work. and you are part of a global community. I don't know about gurus, Sarah. Um, I do like what I do, and I'm confident in myself. But as Nancy Rambush used to say, Maria Montessori was a genius, and so are you. So let's just keep doing it. And Mark, I know that one of the things that Gavin has reached out. Hi, Linda. Of course you can talk.
No, I meant after you'd wrapped up.
Okay.
Well, I just wanted to say I'm totally fangirling here to the point that it's embarrassing. I've just had a year away from school and I've been writing my thoughts and the last month smashing up out AI certs from Anthropic and building things and there's not one thing you didn't say tonight that I haven't heard, thought of, put down in words, trying to divide up my thoughts, and there was not one thing that didn't resonate with me, and the AI to manage things is turning my world around. So I'm just actually going to have to settle down to go to sleep tonight because it was so wonderful to hear you say those things and reaffirming of all the last 3 months to 4 months of smashing out a decade of my thoughts and experience about this. So thank you.
It's really kind. My wife will get such a tickle when she gets up here because I got up. I woke up at 2:30 this morning and said, "Do I have something to do today?" I looked and said, "Oh my God, I'm supposed to be up to see Mark." Um, so somehow or another, I did wake up and I got up, and it's now what 5:11 in the morning here in Washington, D.C. Mark, there's rumor that you're trying to put together a group that might want to spend 3 days in retreat with me down in Sydney, right? If there's enough
Yes.
interest. If there's enough interest.
Yeah.
So in
July
August,
30th,
I've
August 1st.
already put my interest in before I met you. I'll mute myself now so I stop talking.
don't worry, don't worry. Anyway, the foundation is a global organization. We have friends and members all over the world. We work with people everywhere, and we work in partnership. In fact, Mark and I have known each other for a long time. We've served on many groups together, and I'm very pleased to support Montessori Australia and encourage all of you down there. So it's like second
So
home.
we have a national conference coming up in end of July, 1st of August, and Tim will be the one of the keynotes, the keynote really. So you're also doing a special workshop before the conference. So we look forward to having you out again as we did last year.
I
Well,
always enjoy it, my friends.
yeah. Thank you everybody for coming to Montessori Lives this evening, and I'll see you again in a couple of weeks.